All right, everybody. So today we have Dr. Ralph Esposito with us. He is a medical consultant and research analyst, and you're in New York currently, is that right?
I'm in New York. That's right.
Okay. And so how long have you been in this field?
So I've been practicing technically for a little over 2 years. And prior to that, I was in my naturopathic medical school training, and but during my time as a medical student, and even slightly part of my undergrad, and then even after graduate school, medical school, I was a medical intern at NYU urology. So I was working there, assisting one of the doctors at NYU urology, Dr. Espinoza, just conducting research, assisting with patients, and have gotten more than my feet wet in the urology and men's health field.
Sure, sure. And so, I mean, you're pretty much an expert, I would say, on hormones and male health, things like that. So my background is, at least in undergrad, was exercise science and nutrition. And I know you lift a lot as well. And for those people who are in that lifestyle, hormones are going to play a big role. But there's a lot we can do about it, but there's also things that people don't necessarily want to get too involved with it, such as testosterone replacement therapy, at least
Right.
until they're significantly older, maybe at 40 plus when the hormones start to drop off a lot more.
Yeah.
So early on, if we're talking 20s and 30s, how much of a focus do you think monitoring levels of, let's say, cortisol, testosterone, other hormones are? Or is it kind of something that at that age, you don't necessarily have to worry about it so much for optimal results in health?
So you're saying, do we need to worry about testosterone and hormonal balances or imbalances under the age of like 30 or 40?
Correct. In your experience there, yeah.
Yeah, I think the answer is can be dictated by what the patient is certainly feeling. Now, the the prevalence of hypogonadism, low testosterone, and other issues that come along with that, such as sexual dysfunction and low libido and fatigue and difficulty gaining muscle mass, um, irritability, brain fog, inability to focus. I've seen that as early as 18, 20 years old, right?
Right.
And these are in men who have not abused anabolic steroids. So this is that's the first thing that we think about. Okay, well, this person's experiencing this, or they must have taken steroids, or they must have taken something that was throwing them off. But so it can happen as early as 18, 20, 25 years old. If that patient is showing those symptoms, some doctors would say, "Oh man, it's nothing. You don't really need to check it," right?
Mm-hmm.
But in fact, it is something that you want to pay attention to. So I certainly test, regardless of age. I will want to get a baseline hormonal level. If not, even if I don't catch anything, even if the levels are within range or within my range, at least I know what a baseline is, because my type of care that I provide or that I help people with has is not for just the short term, not for 6 months, but for 6 years and 30 years and 40 years. So if I know what your levels are at 25, 30, and then I take a look at your levels at 40 and 50, I'll know your trend. And then it becomes really personalized. So I don't
Right.
think that you can limit or say that you should not test it below a certain age. Although I do know a lot of doctors that will not. I
Right.
typically will always check, total testosterone, free testosterone, FSH, LH, estradiol, um, uh, DHEA,
Mm-hmm.
S. I'll sometimes check prolactin levels. So we definitely go in depth as to what we're looking at.
Right. And I'm sure it also, like, since you take such a span of time there, you see trends that, for instance, my father, even at 55 years old, he had testosterone in the mid 600s. And so, most people would say that's pretty good. But I've heard other people say, well, if somebody was used to levels of 1,000 for most of their life, 600 might feel pretty crappy to them, depending on the person and
Yeah.
what they're used to. And
Yeah.
also, I mean, that's just a total level. We're not even factoring in sex hormone binding globulin and estradiol
Right.
levels and other things like that.
Right.
So,
Right.
yeah.
So just to comment a little bit on that. So when you look at testosterone levels, depending on the lab, there should be ranges based on age, and then you should also look at the percentiles or because this is how reference ranges work, is that they look at a median, right? And then they put 2 standard deviations above and 2 standard deviations below, and that's what they consider normal, right? Or quote unquote normal.
Mm-hmm.
But actually what we're saying, if the lower range is 400, right? If 2 standard deviations, the negative 2 standard deviations is 400 and plus 2 standard deviations is 1200, then 600, some doctors may say that that's okay, but in fact it's not, right? Because you're still within negative 2 standard deviation. You're not at the mean or the median, right? So this has, what you're really looking at here is you want to make sure that they're at their optimal level. And furthermore, what you were saying is if people are used to a level of 1,000 when they were 20, 30 years old, and now they're at a level of 600, although it's considered okay, the issue may not necessarily be the testosterone, but it may be the estrogen receptors. Estrogen might be elevated, but also the androgen or testosterone receptors. And that's what's really, really important that a lot of people don't pay attention to. And that's with all hormones. I think one of the only hormones that we tend to look at receptors for might be like growth hormone, right? And we know that, if you stimulate growth hormone, you can promote certain types of cancers, or actually might be protective in some instances. But nobody's really looking at androgen receptors. They do look at it for like prostate cancer or like androgen deprivation therapy. But when you look at androgens, you want to look at the testosterone receptors, because that's what it comes down to. You could have a testosterone level of 1,800, 2,000, but if those receptors are shut down, the message is not getting through. It's like knocking on a door where nobody's home.
Right. Yeah, I mean, there are also just studies showing the variance in androgen receptors among different populations, and you see different results in there. Higher levels of prostate cancer in African-American males, for instance, they've seen higher levels of androgen receptors, at least the last time I saw a study on that. So, I mean, there's certainly going to be population variances as well.
Absolutely. And, one thing that I have been a little bit intrigued about is something called CAG repeats, which is basically a nucleotide repeat. And the more CAG repeats that you have, the less sensitive your androgen receptors are. I was thinking insulin. Sorry. Insulin receptors, right? Insulin resistance. And we think that insulin is the only hormone we can become resistant to, but that's not the case. So in the case of testosterone, more CAG repeats may make your testosterone receptors desensitized, or you get testosterone resistance, which then can impact the way you actually feel.
Interesting. And so for people who, like I said, at let's say 20s or 30s, but really any age, what are some of the methods that you've found are able to naturally improve these hormonal levels? I mean, obviously nutrition and sleep like that, but as far as specifics, I know you've mentioned before that you think most people should be getting closer to 8 hours of sleep. Is that right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
And so how big of an effect, I mean, and I'm sure you do a lot of testing on your patients. So for somebody who's getting, let's say, 5 hours of sleep and poor nutrition, what sort of detriments are you seeing there in their blood panels?
Yeah, so 5 hours of sleep, I would consider that sleep deprivation, right? And it's very interesting because there was a very well done study that I always refer to emphasize how important sleep is. And the study showed that men who were sleep deprived had lower testosterone levels, and they actually intentionally sleep deprived them. That was the experimental group. They deprived those men of sleep.
Right.
And then when they put those men in the group that were getting adequate amount of sleep of 7 hours plus, their testosterone levels recovered equal to that of what one would receive with testosterone replacement therapy.
Wow.
So basically, correcting their sleep and their circadian rhythm would actually be more beneficial, if not as beneficial, than getting testosterone shots from your doctor, right? So when I see men who are sleep deprived, and women as well, what it does, it changes their circadian rhythm. Their cortisol levels are inconsistent, so therefore their cortisol levels could be significantly elevated. Higher cortisol levels can also cause damage to your testosterone synthesis, right? So what you typically see, and I don't test cortisol in the blood because it is not very accurate. And cortisol, as you know, is has a diurnal pattern, right? So it's highest in the morning, or should actually, it's highest in the morning. Overnight, it's at its lowest, or should be low overnight. highest in the morning upon waking, and then should dip in the afternoon and drop again in the evening. If you do a blood test, you're really getting it in 1 second and 1 point at a time,
Right.
and you're not seeing all of the cortisol metabolites. So you don't really get free cortisol, total cortisol, cortisone, and then the metabolites that those are converted into. So I don't test cortisol in the blood. I do cortisol via urine test, which is a 4-spot test, right?
Gotcha.
So what you'll see is you'll tend to see high cortisol levels. You'll see high insulin levels because high cortisol will then increase your blood sugar, which then causes your insulin to stay elevated, which then can lead to more insulin resistance, which leads to more belly fat. You have more belly fat, you have more aromatase enzyme, and then what you'll see there is higher estradiol levels.
Right.
Right. So higher estradiol levels will then contribute to more fat accumulation. So that is one thing that I certainly see. The other thing that I would see is certainly lower free testosterone levels, lower total testosterone levels. The other thing that you'll also notice is thyroid function can be impacted. And when you have a insufficient amount of thyroid hormone, what will happen is it can contribute to decreased testosterone levels because thyroid hormone actually activates a cascade in your Leydig cells of the testes, which are responsible for making testosterone. They require thyroid hormone. And if thyroid hormone is insufficient, then you can't even turn on the powerhouses that are supposed to make testosterone. So it's a huge cascade, and unfortunately many physicians dismiss the unity and the wholesome of the whole body. And these are definitely things that you will see.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that was a very comprehensive answer. You touched on a few things I was going to bring up there. So one is, I don't think many people understand the relationship of thyroid to testosterone there. And I believe, is it TRH that stimulates the Leydig cells itself?
Well, it's interesting because Leydig cells they think that Leydig cells have TRH receptors.
Yeah.
It's actually the free T3 hormone that's doing
okay,
it.
it is. Okay.
TRH would work more centrally, but I question, why do Leydig cells have TRH receptors? And
that's kind of what I was wondering. That's interesting.
It is an thought.
And then as far as the cortisol, I mean, that's been my observation on myself. So just because I've had access to it, I've had tons of blood work over the years just because I find it very interesting to see the trends. But cortisol is one that I've never really found overly useful. It's always kind of in range, and there's a little bit of variance there. It's a little bit more. I just do like the AM cortisol because I can just get it done. But like I said, it doesn't seem overly relevant. And there's been times where, and maybe you can speak to this, is I will feel if I've been, let's say, dieting hard for months, and I'm at the point where even though I seem to be in a deficit, I'm not losing weight, and I seem to be retaining some water, tons of activity, all these things that would make me think my cortisol is probably very high right now, along with, stress from dental school or whatever was going on at the time. And I'll measure it, and it's still relatively normal. And I'm like, well, maybe it is actually normal, but it just seems to me like that's the one test that just doesn't seem to be representing what I'm feeling and noticing. But I've never done the urine analysis for that one.
Right. So, and exactly. So you are a real life example of, you have to listen to the body, right? And say, okay, well, I feel like my cortisol levels are elevated right now, but so I do a test and it comes back normal. A lot of people do salivary hormonal testing, salivary cortisol testing. I don't find that to be completely helpful because your salivary glands can metabolize some of your cortisol. Okay. So if it's metabolizing some of the cortisol, you then need to measure the metabolites. Okay, so now you're missing a whole big part of the picture. So sometimes your cortisol will come back low. You say, oh, okay, check my salivary cortisol. It came back low. It means I'm okay. Or came back low. I need to take more, I need to work on some lifestyle and herbs and supplements to help improve that aspect. But actually, you could just be completely wrong. So one test that I use, and a complete disclaimer, I have no financial association with this company, but I find their test to be very helpful. It's called the Dutch test, and it's a dried urinary hormonal test. And they check they do a urine test, and they check your urine 4 times throughout the day, and they see where they give you your cortisol levels upon you wake up, after you wake up, in the afternoon and at night, and they also test the metabolites. So you get and your bladder is a reservoir, right? Whatever goes in your bladder, it's going to stay there until you urinate it out. And that's exactly what this test will do. It'll give you an idea of what your body has been making during the day and during those periods of time. So that's the best way that I have found to test cortisol levels.
Yeah, that's interesting. So is that a test people can get online, or you have to get that order? Okay, yeah. I'll have to look into
It's
that
called
one
the
myself.
Dutch test, DUTCH.
Very cool. Okay. And as far as nutrition's effect on the different hormones, I know you're generally not a huge fan of carbs. Is that right? Or I guess excessive carbs, refined carbs,
Yeah. So similar to you, my undergrad is from NYU in nutrition and dietetics. So I have been, people call it a job or whatever it is. Like, this is a hobby for me. So
Right.
because I like to experiment with my own body, I want to be the best that I possibly could be, right? Because you have one life and one body, and you take care of it. It's not that I'm not a fan of carbohydrates. I eat carbohydrates. I do. It depends on the timing and the types. So my carbs are not refined. They're not processed. Even oatmeal sometimes can be processed, because what really defines a processed food is, did it look like this when it came out of the ground, or did it look like this when it came out of wherever it came from, right? And sometimes oatmeal is, right? Like Quaker Oats oatmeal, it's with maple syrup and all this other, like, that's processed, right?
Right, sure.
So carbohydrates should be timed around your exercise. So I typically will only consume carbohydrates after I work out. If I'm going to have carbohydrates at any other time during the day, I make sure that it's paired with fat to kind of slow the absorption. Because really what the problem is it's not the actual carbohydrate, it's what the carbohydrate does to your blood sugar, and then what that'll do to your insulin levels. So in terms of dietary therapy that you can do, or dietary tools that you can use, is, you want to make sure that you're having adequate amounts of protein, and certainly you want to have higher levels of monounsaturated and polyunsaturated fats. And then you want to make sure that your carbohydrates are limited to mostly vegetables, select amount of fruits. Bananas are probably one of the highest sugary fruits that you can have. So
Right.
try to stay away from those. A lot of people think, well, I'm not eating carbs, so I'll have a banana. Well, actually,
Yeah, sure.
you're not doing yourself a big benefit. So yeah, nutrition. I mean, we can go down the rabbit hole on nutrition and the impact it'll have on the body, hormones. I mean, that's just.
Sure, man. If you got rants to go, then feel free to talk freely.
Yeah. So the reason why you basically untied me and you just let me loose.
I'm all about it, man. I love this stuff. So.
Okay. So you asked for it. If you,
Yeah. All right.
actually get here. So what happens is that when you have high levels, when you eat a high carbohydrate meal, right? So let's just say you had, a tablespoon of sugar, or I don't know, like a frappuccino with like chocolate chips in it, all this other stuff. What you're really doing is you're stimulating an insulin response, and you stimulate blood sugar to be, or you're increasing blood sugar, which then stimulates insulin release. And what happens is that insulin is it's a pro-inflammatory hormone. It's an anabolic hormone, so it's necessary in order for you to grow, but it induces lipogenesis and inhibits lipolysis, which basically means it induces or stimulates your body to make more fat, and it stops your body from breaking down fat. That's probably the opposite of what people want and what people need, right? Now, if you were in a famine, I would say, yeah, eat a ton of potatoes, eat a ton of sugar, like, you'll hold on to that stuff. But in our lifestyle, we are not very unlikely to be macronutrient deprived, although we are micronutrient insufficient among many aspects.
Yeah.
So what happens is you increase insulin. It directly activates the COX-2 enzyme, which is cyclooxygenase 2, which is the enzyme that many people, or the enzyme that is targeted in a lot of NSAIDs, non-steroidal anti-inflammatory drugs, like ibuprofen and actually Tylenol, and aspirin. Yeah, actually Tylenol is not a COX-2 inhibitor, but they work in very similar pathways, right? So it inhibits that, or stimulates that, and what actually happens there is now you're increasing the production of thromboxanes and prostaglandins and eicosanoids. and you stimulate the production of 2 and 4 series of eicosanoids. And these eicosanoids are pro-inflammatory compared to, and this also is within the context of a saturated fat. So the body will do it. It'll take that saturated fat, break it down via the COX enzyme, and then break it into the pro-inflammatory molecules, right? But now, if your body is taking the fat, but instead of taking a saturated fat, it'll take a polyunsaturated or a monounsaturated fat, then it tends to make the anti-inflammatory molecules, the anti-inflammatory eicosanoids, which are the 1 and 3 series. Mm-hmm. So what are the few things that a lot of people don't eat in America or in a typical diet? Fish, lots of plants, so like flax and chia, right, which are high in omega-3s, although it's ALA, so not a huge fan. Not as beneficial because we do have issues in the desaturase enzymes, which are responsible. Yep. Exactly right. But EPA and DHA, which is omega-3 fatty acids, you use those immediately. So we're not eating a lot of fish, but we tend to eat a little bit more of the saturated and hydrogenated fats, right? So like from animal meats, butter, although I'm not opposed to those things, but when you combine it with sugar and carbohydrates, you now have the perfect storm to make an inflammatory cascade, which then creates these issues. On top of that, insulin will directly stimulate aromatase enzyme. An aromatase enzyme takes your testosterone and converts it into estrone, right, and estradiol.
Right.
So now you're making more estrogens, and the cascade starts over again.
Sure. And real quick, I was going to say, I think what you're saying about combining the saturated fat with the sugars, I mean, that's one of the huge confounding variables with a lot of these studies on high saturated fat is people say, I mean, I'm not saying like a ketogenic diet is this amazing diet. I mean, I think there are applications for it, but people will see it and they'll say, oh, but look at the studies that a high saturated fat diet causes all these issues. And it's like, well, yeah, but it's also a high sugar diet, a high carb diet that they're studying. They're not studying it in the absence of these sugar spikes and insulin spikes, and it's a completely different context.
Absolutely right. And I actually just had a conversation with a colleague of mine who it's unfortunate, I don't think many healthcare providers, and I'm not saying doctors, I'm just saying healthcare providers who will claim knowledge or claim that they have knowledge based on science and studies. But your knowledge is based on your interpretation of that study, right? And if you don't know how to properly interpret a study or understand what an odds ratio is or a relative risk compared to an absolute risk, compared to a confidence intervals to a p-value, right? So everybody thinks if it's a p-value less than 0.5, then it's statistically significant. No, but that means it's significantly different from what we have found in the control group. It does not necessarily mean anything at all, actually. So that is another rabbit hole. But I had a conversation with a colleague, and like, these drugs increase the risk of Alzheimer's. I said, yes, but the relative risk is at 1.08, which means it's an 8% increased risk for those who take this drug. Now, the absolute risk of getting that disease is 2%. So you're now looking at an 8% increase based on a 2%.
Right.
It's insignificant.
Right. Yeah, exactly.
Realistically insignificant. So, again, that's another pet peeve of mine.
Right. Yeah, I think there was a statin study I saw as well. I have no idea what your stance on statins is, but it was something like they were promoting, obviously the pharmaceutical company was promoting this huge, improvement. But when you looked at the absolute improvement, it was like maybe 1% or something like that. It was just such a minuscule difference. So you see
I'm
that a lot.
I'm not familiar with that study, but you do see that a lot. You do.
Yeah. So let's see. So we talked about the cortisol. So now your background, a lot of men's health, lipidology, cardiovascular health, and gut health. So let's talk about gut health for a little bit there. A lot of people have digestive issues. It seems like almost everybody has some digestive issue that they mention. Different, intolerances, and some of the tests out there I think are a little, I don't want to say they're scams, but there's not a ton of science behind them, and people report that they give these great benefits. But what are some of the biggest issues you've seen with the current diets of, I mean, general population, I guess, but even people who are focused on this, that they might think that they're doing something good for their health, their gut health, but it's actually maybe detrimental in the long run.
You're saying what diets do I think are detrimental?
Maybe
Or what
not
do I think that they're
specific
doing?
diets, but what do you think is a common thing a lot of people are doing now that they think is healthy, but maybe isn't actually that great for gut health, if that makes sense?
Yeah, I think the one thing that I came across was the carnivore diet,
Yeah.
right? It's eat meat, only
Right.
meat, and nothing but meat. So help you God, right?
Right.
Um, that was a little bit baffling to me because I think the one thing that all research shows, like vegetables are good,
Pretty much.
right? But I would say that the research doesn't necessarily show that meat is bad,
Right.
right? Now, there are studies who will say, meat increases the risk of prostate cancer or certain types of cancers. And I would say we have to really look at the data and understand exactly what we're looking at. What are they addressing and assessing and adjusting for confounding factors, right? Like you were saying, are they addressing for their carbohydrate intake? Are they looking at what type of fats they were eating, or what type of meat that they were eating, right? But I will say that the microbiome and your intestinal tract does benefit from fiber. It does benefit from phytonutrients like that found in like turmeric, curcumin, broccoli with sulforaphanes, right? Or DIM also found in broccoli, or it converted into DIM. Also looking at anthocyanins and proanthocyanins in berries. So a lot of great things in there.
Yeah.
Vitamin C, you need to get it from
Right.
some type of citrus fruit, right? Or some type of fruit. Although vegetables have it as well. So that's one diet that I tend to just I'm baffled by, how.
It seems to have gotten more popular in the last, I mean, just in the last few months, I've heard a lot of people talk about it. I actually just had a brief stint with it, not because I thought it would really be that helpful, but just for GI reasons. I was trying to avoid fiber just for like a few days just to see. And even in those few days, didn't feel great, but it was very hard for me to eat enough too.
Yeah.
I was at the time trying to maintain my weight on around 3,500 calories, and I usually have a pretty big appetite. But 3,500 calories of meat and oil and just like the full fat, it was kind of disgusting, to be honest.
That's tough.
Yeah, I was done with that pretty quickly.
I have experimented with every single diet.
Yeah.
I don't think there's any diet that I have not tried, or that I know of that I have not tried. Keto, vegan, vegetarian, Mediterranean, Atkins, South Beach, blood type, like every single one of these diets I have tried. And another diet that I find that a lot of people don't do properly is a vegan diet. Now, before all the vegan people start attacking me, just listen, right? There's a proper and improper way to do a vegan diet. And let's be clear, right? There's a difference between vegetarian and vegan, and then there's ovo-pesco-vegetarian, and then there's just pescatarian, right? I personally believe that a plant-based diet is probably going to be one of the healthiest diets for you. But just going only plants does not necessarily mean that it's beneficial for you. Now, somebody like myself, I'm very into fitness. I lift, I work out, I'm very active. I probably would have to eat an immense amount of calories in order to consume the adequate amounts of protein, and in particular the amino acid leucine, which is a major protein. And one of my very good friends, Dr. Gabrielle Lyon, is an expert in this, and that helps induce muscle synthesis. In order to get that adequate amount, you need to eat an immense amount of plants, and I'm incapable of doing that, right? But a lot of people who are on a vegan diet, they will consider potatoes, potato chips, French fries, right? Tons of soy foods. What's that? Like imitation meat, which is like gluten patties. I don't know what that is. Veggie burgers, right? So they're not eating a lot of healthy, fatty type of vegetables, or actually pretty hard, right? So you have to get like enough nuts, you have to get enough seeds, avocado, coconut, it's really hard to get a lot of those nutrients, and also the ability to get omega-3 fatty acids, EPA and
Right.
DHA.
Yeah.
You can't get it from plants.
Mhm.
So you need to eat a lot of chia, a lot of flax. Purslane is another vegetable that has high in omega-3s. So I think it's a very healthy diet if done properly, but it tends to be higher in carbohydrates,
Sure.
and sometimes vegans tend to turn into startitarians, and then
Right.
that creates a problem on its own.
Yeah, it is. It's definitely ironic. I mean, if they're doing it for ethical reasons, that's one thing. But I
Yeah,
do know
right,
plenty.
right.
Yeah, but there's plenty of vegans who. I mean, when I did the the brief stint of the carnivore diet, and I took a picture, and I had I don't know how many pounds of different meats and everything, and I had a few people say, "Oh, that's so unhealthy." But these are the same like vegans who are having like their Pop Tarts and
Yeah.
whatever else there, and
Oreos are vegan.
yeah, I mean, technically they are vegan, and so there's plenty of unhealthy vegan foods. There's plenty of unhealthy keto foods.
Yeah.
Any diet, you could have terrible foods for you. So I don't think it's as much, just what a lot of people take it as like, what can I fit into this diet and still
Yes.
count it as vegan or keto? And like, they're
Right.
kind of missing the concept there, what the point
Exactly
is.
right. Yeah, that happens with keto too.
Sure. Yeah.
People do a ketogenic diet and they're like, oh, I just want to eat, what do they call it? Like keto bombs. And they're just like, or fat bombs. And they're just
Oh, I
like
think yeah.
coconut oil, coconut cream, like ghee, or like even like bulletproof coffee.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. I admit, I tried the bulletproof diet. I did
Yeah.
the bulletproof coffee. Did I lose a pound of weight? No.
Yeah.
Probably because I was eating so well that I've hit my average weight. I weigh about like 195 to 200 pounds, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I've hit that weight. But going on the keto diet, on the bulletproof diet with the bulletproof coffee, I was consuming like 400 calories just in a beverage.
Right.
So people say, yeah, I'm going to go keto. I'm going to go follow this diet, have butter in my coffee and sip butter in my coffee all day and I should lose weight. Well, let's not forget that you're consuming an immense amount of calories as well. Because remember, calorie load also impacts how your hormonal impact as well. So even a hypercaloric ketogenic diet can kick you out of ketosis.
Right.
Nutritional
And now,
ketosis.
I'm sure you track your lipid values throughout a lot of these diets.
Yeah.
How did you find your lipids were on a keto diet?
They didn't, this is the thing, is because I exercise, right? And I eat a lot of vegetables my keto diet was, driven by a high plant-based, the plants in my ketogenic diet were high, but they were, my plants were the vehicle for me to consume more fat, right?
Right.
So if I needed to get more fat in my diet, I wasn't doing it by eating like more bacon. I was maybe sauteing broccoli or Brussels sprouts with olive oil or ghee, and then maybe using some type of like that avocado mayo, which is out of this world. I
I've
don't know if
heard
you've
good
ever tried.
things. I haven't tried. I've heard good things
Oh,
though.
you need to get some. It is
Yeah.
phenomenal. Like olives. So I was eating a lot of plant-based type of fatty foods, and I wasn't eating a lot of protein. But I will say my LDLP, my total cholesterol, which I don't really consider significant, those were elevated. But my HDL was, although it's arguable if that's protective or not, was at like 85.
Okay. What was it before? Do you know?
Like 60.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I'm kind of in the middle of an experiment, and I'll probably make a separate video for this at some point. But I had done keto back in, I don't know, sometime in high school, and then I had done it again in college just for like a semester or two. And then recently I did it again just to kind of experiment with it, and definitely some downsides to it. GI actually was improved, and I guess, less dips in energy throughout the day.
Yeah.
But I got one of the advanced, like you, I got one of the advanced, the cardio IQ, I think they call it, lipid panels.
Which is an NMR.
Yeah, right.
Yep.
And then, so before my values, I mean, they were pretty good. They weren't amazing, but I've always had pretty good cholesterol levels. Now my keto diet was not a ton of saturated fat. I mean, I definitely had full fat beef, chicken thighs and stuff like that, but still, avocados, olive oil, normal amounts, I would say. and I guess like a standard healthy keto diet, if you're looking at it like that. And my cholesterol skyrocketed. My total went from 208 to I think 340.
Wow.
My LDLP, I don't remember the exact numbers, but they increased a lot. And my small, because sometimes you'll see people say on a low carb, high fat diet, yeah, cholesterol will go up, but it's because your HDL goes up and your LDL becomes, the big fluffy kind, and so
Yep.
it's fine. That was not my experience. My small LDL doubled, or actually, no, sorry, it tripled. It went a lot higher. HDL was already about 70, and it went
Yeah.
out to about 74, so, a little bit. And triglycerides, a lot of people say keto will always lower triglycerides. Mine slightly went up. So I definitely had
That interests me. That I don't see.
yeah.
I
And
do
yeah, it
not
seems
see a
to be,
ketogenic diet increase triglycerides.
yeah, I mean, and it could be, I could pull up, 30 times I've had triglycerides tested over the years, and I could compare to that. I mean, they still weren't high. They were, they went from like 55 to 70. So they were still great,
Right.
but it was relatively, compared to the other one, higher. So that was after 6 weeks. And I know some people say that there is an increase and then more of a balancing after that for
Yeah.
the
So
keto.
when you fat adapt.
Right. And so, I mean, that was after 6 weeks, and I've measured my ketones, and they're not super high, between 1 and 2, usually maybe 1 to 3.
Mm-hmm.
So my next experiment that I'm currently doing is I said, okay, completely lean meats. I'm buying like Atlantic salmon, and all my fats are going to come from omega-3s, olive oil,
Yeah.
and avocado. And so I'm interested to see when like almost entirely all my fats are coming from that, what will it be after another 6 weeks? But again, there's a slight confounder there. Maybe it would have gone down a little bit anyway.
Right.
But we'll see. I'm interested to see what happens. That'll be in about 5 weeks from now. I'll test that again and see.
And to your point, which is super important, and I want to emphasize this, is the type of fat matters.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And I'm not talking about just, is it from salmon or is it from chicken, but is it farm raised versus, because farm raised salmon has lower levels of omega-3 fatty acids,
Sure.
right?
Yep.
And then having a ketogenic diet with predominantly poly and monounsaturated fats is likely to be more beneficial than having a higher saturated fat ketogenic diet. So a very great point that you brought up there, and I would probably guess that it'll improve.
I think it will improve, but like I said, I had no dairy, so I wasn't doing, tons of, some people like load up on sour cream and bacon, none of that. It was just, beef and chicken. But we'll see. I mean, it would have to improve, I think, quite a bit for me to stick with it, just given how much it was elevated. But we'll see. It's just like you, I like to experiment with these things. So
I'm curious to see what your homocysteine, your CRP, your fibrinogen, your ESR, your ferritin. I like to see what those.
Yeah, I do have all those. If I can send them to you at some point if you want to see those. But,
yeah, I'm curious.
Yeah, CRP though has always been, well, I won't say always. Generally, it's been good. It was 0.3 before, and it's 0.3 now. So it was already so low. I don't think I was going to see too much of a change there.
Exactly.
ESR went from 9 to 2, so that's okay.
It's still low, but
it's yeah. And then also, so related to GI health, are you familiar with the specific carbohydrate diet?
yeah.
Okay. Have you tried that one?
I did a version of it. I did not completely follow the specific carbohydrate diet. I did more of like a Fodmap.
Okay. All
It is similar, but not exactly the same.
Yeah, similar. Have you seen any good application for that in patients of yours, especially those with some sort of IBD?
It's hit or miss.
Yeah.
Fodmap diet sometimes is hit or miss, and I find that there are foods on the Fodmap that bother people and other foods on the Fodmap that don't. Like, for some people, they won't be bothered by garlic, but they'll be bothered by onions, or they'll be bothered by onions, but not by beans, which is pretty odd, right? And I think the research on the Fodmap diet is also pretty mixed as well. I can't say I'm a huge fan of it, mostly because I haven't seen consistent results. So, but, and it also, why are those fibers causing, or why are those oligosaccharides or those specific carbohydrates, why are they causing this type of inflammatory or irritable response? And part of that could be, maybe it's a microbiome response. And maybe the issue is not the carbohydrate, maybe it's fixing the microbiome. But I still don't think we know enough about the microbiome in order to make significant changes. The only thing that we really know is that the more diverse, the better. But beyond that, I am not quite sure we're making many strides in that location.
Yeah, that's one of those fields that I just feel like I was 20 years from now, I would just love to see I feel
Yeah.
like it's exploding now. It'll be very interesting. But FODMAP and specific carbohydrate diet, I think it seems to be because there's so many potential problems people bring up. Like, are lectins an issue? Are the oligosaccharides an issue? And, at one point, I was just trying to put together a diet where I was like, okay, what is the safest thing that doesn't have any of these? And really, there's like no food. Every food's got something, That's actually how I ended up doing the carnivore diet, because I was like, well, these berries and these fruits have this problem, and these vegetables have this problem, and everything. So, tell me what you think about this. But my thoughts were, of course, you got to try to fix the root of the problem. But as far as figuring out what foods, it seems like a lot of times you just have to try a food and see how you tolerate it, and try another food and see how you tolerate it, which can be a tedious process. If you're adding one food every couple of days, it could be a long time for you to figure out what foods you really tend to tolerate. And hopefully that list expands over time, but not always.
I'm a very big fan of elimination diets because it's a therapeutic and it's a diagnostic tool. I'm not a fan of these food sensitivity tests where they check your IgE or IgG response.
I just had a big conversation about that with somebody.
I completely disagree with them. I don't find them to be effective. I don't find them to be replicable. I don't even find them to be clinically effective when you actually put them down. And people would be like, well, you tell me I can have bananas, but I'm not eating bananas because I'm going to tell you it's like they bothered me, right? So how does that make sense?
Right.
So, though it's really hard to test. So that's why I think an elimination diet where you eliminate these foods for like 2 to 3 weeks, and then you reintroduce one at a time and say, okay, does this bother me? Yes. Then it's out. No? Cool. Then we're going to continue with it. And then once you identify the foods that are not problematic and the ones that are problematic, and you eliminate the problematic foods, then you can actually reduce the burden on the body and allow it to heal in a proper manner. So it's a great tool to identify an issue, and it's a great tool to solve an issue.
Right. How do you feel about, again, this is, we don't have a ton of research on it, or it's applicable research, but a lot of people talk about probiotics. I've actually made my own yogurt with a starter probiotic. It doesn't taste as good as, store-bought yogurt, but in theory, it's supposed to, have a plethora of probiotics in there. But have you found any benefit from probiotics in your work?
For gastrointestinal issues?
Correct, yeah.
It works. Probiotics can be very effective for IBS. It can be effective for colitis. It can be effective for lactose intolerance. I suffered from IBS almost my whole life, and probiotics did nothing for me.
Yeah.
And then I figured out the issue of my IBS had nothing to do with what I was eating or what I was taking. It had to do with the way I was living my life and going through med school, taking 40 credits a semester and trying to rule the world at the same time. Right.
Right.
And that is the biggest factor of what was my issue. Now, for colitis, probiotics can be very effective. For Crohn's, the research shows that they don't have any benefit. There's one probiotic, VSL or VLS.
VSL, yeah.
VSL number 3.
Yeah. Yep.
And that's supposed to be for inflammatory bowel disease, but in fact, it doesn't really work that well for Crohn's. More for colitis. Now, does that mean I should tell somebody who has Crohn's that they should not be taking a probiotic? No, I just tell them, I'm telling you what my opinion is based on the research that I've seen. And I'm not going to tell you to stop taking it because I think the downside and the detriment is zero. The upside is always possible, so why not? If nothing else, they have a placebo effect. And that works.
Yeah, I've known a few people who have taken it, and some people swear by it. I've never really noticed anything from any of the probiotics I've tried before.
Yeah.
I love the concept of them. I get the idea behind them. But personally, right now, like I said, that yogurt I made, costs nothing to make, but so I figured why not try it. But I can't say I've really ever experienced too much of a benefit from it.
Probiotics I've shown to be, I've used personally and with in the past with patients for preventing a cold and managing a cold, like the common cold. So that's probably a really good tool of it for now we're coming into the fall season. It's something that I'll probably start introducing.
Interesting. Another thing I hear people talk about a lot recently actually is betaine, HCl, and digestive enzymes.
Hmm.
Any thoughts on those two with your patients?
Yeah, so beta HCl is basically hydrochloric acid that
Hmm.
can help you digest your food. And I have found benefit from patients including that into their regimen. And oftentimes, I would first start with apple cider vinegar because what we're
Hmm.
really trying to do is just lower the pH, right? We want to make it more acidic in order for us to help break down these proteins and carbohydrates a little bit better. Now, most of the time people who have digestive issues is not because they are or even have acid reflux. It's not because they have too much acid. It's because they have too little. And what's
Yeah.
happening is that their food is not being digested. And the gastric emptying process is influenced by your pH. So
Right.
the higher your pH, the more basic your pH or the less acidic your pH is, the weaker the something called the lower esophageal sphincter is in your stomach, right?
Hmm.
So the more acidic, the tighter it closes, the better you're keeping the acid in your stomach and out of your esophagus. And adding apple cider vinegar or beta HCl can actually improve that aspect.
Right.
Um, Digestive enzymes can also be very helpful, especially if people know that they're going to eat a certain food that bothers them, or like dairy, or they're going to eat a high vegetable diet, like a lot of fiber, and they're like, okay, I know this is going to bother me. I'm going to take some, like black bean soup or something like that.
Right.
So I would say, yeah, it can be effective in those times, but does not necessarily mean that's something that you have to take every day.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm glad you brought up the pH thing because that's something I've found very interesting recently, and I see a huge dichotomy between what is taught in like med school and traditional medicine and versus like the functional medicine side and people who are willing to experiment. Because as far as I'm aware, everyone who is in med school is taught if you have acid reflux, you need a PPI or something like that
Yeah.
to help the acid in your stomach. But not only are there some long-term issues with taking something like omeprazole for years and years on end, but I never hear anybody talk about how the issue is not enough acid. And so, but if you go online and you read reviews of betaine HCl, I mean, there's literally hundreds, if not thousands of people saying, I had acid reflux for years. I took this and I can finally go to sleep without having reflux. I can finally eat this food. And I'm not sure, and to be honest, I haven't seen too many studies on this, so I can't say what the studies actually show. But I mean, have you seen that dichotomy between what traditional medicine is doing for people with reflux and, I guess what people are experimenting with?
Absolutely, all the time. I mean,
Yeah.
even when I was in med school, it was just like, how do we test this? Oh, well, we can we can do, we call it the string test, where
Hmm.
it's a pill that they kind of swallow attached to a string, and it checks the pH, and then you
Right.
just check that, right? I don't like doing that. I have actually advised against that. You can, titrate up your HCl, beta and HCl, and see if that helps you. Um, there, and it baffles me because I'm not saying anything that basic biophysiology would disagree with.
Hmm.
I'm going by the anatomy, the biology, the physiology of the body. And that makes most sense to me. So if I can use that aspect and try to figure things out on a basic science level, then
Yeah.
that makes sense to me. I wonder, you know, I don't really have a lot of these conversations with doctors and other conventional physicians because sometimes they don't want to hear it, and I'm not
Hmm.
going to try to convince somebody of something that is, not. I'm not going to try to convince you that I'm right
Sure.
ever, because if you don't believe in an open mind, then there's no convincing that I'm going to do for you. So, but I do see that issue. And when I have a colleague who was first opposed to it, and then all of a sudden it's like, actually my patients are saying this, like there must be something to it, then we have a conversation. But yeah, absolutely, all the time.
Why are you against that string test? Because I know of it. I've not done it. It sounded interesting to me to actually get a value because I like to see actual numbers and values there so we can know we have a starting point.
Yeah.
So I'm interested to hear.
It's not that I'm opposed to that test. I would prefer the smart pill,
Okay.
which is a pill that you would swallow and you don't have to attach it to a string and pull it back out.
Yeah.
I'm not opposed to the test. It's a little bit uncomfortable for the patient.
Hmm.
And I'm not sure that might be the best way to go about getting that answer.
Okay.
The smart pill, which can show you gastric motility, and also pH would actually probably be a little bit of a better tool for me.
Gotcha. Okay. Yeah. And betaine HCl is actually another one I've just been experimenting with. I never thought I had any type of GERD or anything like that. And I went to an ENT as I noticed something on the back of my throat. And he was like, oh, yeah, that's just from acid reflux. I mean, this was literally just a couple months ago. And I was like, I don't have acid reflux. He's like, oh, well, it might just be a little bit there. It's like, all right, I've never really had any symptoms of it. And I've noticed since starting the keto diet, and it's odd because, again, online, people will talk so much about how keto helped their acid reflux. Not the case for me. I've never before had an issue, and now I definitely feel these like reflux symptoms. So another reason why I don't know if keto will be for me long term. But in any case, so I tried the betaine HCl, and I've worked up to, I was looking for that. They talk about titrating up and waiting until you kind of feel that warm feeling and everything and kind of burning sensation. And I'm up to 6 pills right now for one meal. Can't say I feel anything, which either means they're not doing anything or I actually have, very little stomach acid, which I don't think has ever been an issue, but who knows? So that's why I'd like to do a test that gives me an actual value.
Well, I actually did that same thing. I think I was up to 10 pills a day.
Yeah, wow. Did you feel anything eventually?
No. Nope. No. Didn't feel better, didn't feel burning, and I was like, I am not taking 10 pills before every meal.
Right, yeah, it'd be ridiculous.
I will figure this out a different way.
So did you have reflux symptoms when you tried that experiment?
Nope.
Is that what
I just had IBS, indigestion, gotcha. So like I felt like I wasn't digesting my food. Yeah. Like, and I would just eat a meal and just not be hungry for the rest of the day because I just felt like my food was sitting there.
Right. So ultimately, what did you do? What did you find?
I fixed my thyroid.
Wow. Okay. So really,
it was a thyroid issue where I was subclinical hypothyroid, and I had to correct that. Correct the sleep, correct the exercise, correct the part of my diet as well. I added some adaptogens to that aspect.
You're talking about like ashwagandha and things like that, or
ashwagandha, rhodiola, yep, zinc, selenium, those things, and the issue resolved.
Wow. Yeah. I'll probably finish the bottle I have just to, keep experimenting. But so far, I can't say I've really noticed anything from it.
Yeah, definitely.
All right. So I don't want to take too much more of your time. Just 1 or 2 more questions here. So, right now it's still the stance. I think the, American Heart Institute. They still talk about. I think the recommendation they give is like 7% saturated fat in your diet. It's something very low. They're still going by that. And I keep seeing more and more research showing that, saturated fat is an issue. And we talked a little bit about the context of that. But do you find that they're just completely behind the times, or do you find that there are still some solid recommendations we should listen to these governing bodies?
That's a loaded question. Do I think they're behind the times? I think they are a little bit behind. I don't think they, again, are looking at the context of saturated fat intake, types of saturated fat, so, and also carbohydrate intake, right, and sugar. So what factor does that play into it? But I will say that higher levels of saturated fat in some people, when you reduce that and replace it with a different type of fat, they actually see benefit. So I do think they are a little bit behind the times in terms of, is all fat bad? And I think, they recommend trying to avoid a high fat diet altogether. And the Academy of Nutrition and Dietetics, Nutrition and Dietetics, their diet for diabetics is like 40 to 60% carbohydrate, which is ridiculous for somebody who can't metabolize sugar, right?
Right.
You would think, sugar, too much sugar, eat less sugar, kind of makes sense, right? But doesn't necessarily follow their guidelines. So yeah, I do think they're a little bit behind the curve here, because many people can benefit from a moderately high fat, low carbohydrate diet, and they can reduce their risk of cardiovascular disease doing that. But I think for a general rule, for the general population who doesn't understand that limiting sugars and starches and refined carbohydrates is necessary, then I would say, yeah, those people need to limit their saturated fat intake.
Okay, great answer. All right, so very last question. So for all the people listening to this, any just like top easy tip for everybody to, whether it's get more sleep, eat a certain type of way, what would your main tip be from somebody who wants an actionable step from this interview?
Yeah, I don't like to recommend like, okay, take this supplement or take this herb or make sure you get on this drug. What I would say is if you're going to do one or two things, make sure you move every day, right?
Yeah.
Sedentary lifestyle is associated with many health risk, or it increases your risk of many health issues, especially cardiovascular disease, Alzheimer's, things like that. And I just want to advise people that you really need to move. The body is not built to just be sitting all day. And on top of that, do not, for under any circumstances, sacrifice your sleep to try to go and exercise and move and think that exercising and moving on 5 hours of sleep is going to do you any good.
Right. Sure.
All right. So sleep over everything. Sleep first. Move always, and eat a lot of plants.
Okay. All right. Great advice, man. So let's see. You are on Instagram. Anywhere
Yeah.
else people can find you?
Pretty much on Instagram at Dr. Esposito. You can also find me on Twitter, but I'm most active on Instagram, and then also my website, drralphesposito.com.
Okay. Great. Thanks so much, man.
All right. Thanks for having me.
Hope you guys enjoyed that interview with the very knowledgeable Dr. Ralph Esposito. If you did, like the video, comment down below. And if you like the charity that we're donating to, please feel free to make your own donation and subscribe to the channel to get more interviews like this.